Thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak at this event. So my name is, So my name is Dr. Ronan. I'm a Senior Research Director at Omdia. Omdia is part of the Informa Group. Sorry, it was a bit too tall. So I'm part of, Omdia is part of the Informa Group and Informa Tech, more specifically. Omdia, for those of you who don't know, we are a research organization. We have 400 analysts worldwide, so it's a pretty big organization. We recently bought Canalys, in case you know about those guys. And also, so Informa Tech, we run some conferences that you may have heard of, like, for example, AI Summit, the Games Developer Conference, AfricaCom, and London Tech Week. So we are also an events organization, and we have some digital media properties like telecoms.com and Light Reading, also part of Informa. So my presentation today is about 5G. I lead a team of 30 analysts located in different parts of the world that monitor very closely the progress of 5G. And the purpose of the presentation is really to give you an update on where 5G is at, and also to give you a view of future outlook for 5G. So first of all, I wanted to start with some of the what expectations we had for 5G initially, or what observations we've made on 5G initially. I think there's been a misconception that 5G is performing better than 4G. I think it was maybe true at the beginning when we look at the progression of 5G from launch versus 4G around the same time when 4G launched. However, when we look, so that's the chart on the left. However, when we look at how fast 4G progressed at the same stage of maturity as 5G is today, then 5G is slower. So we're progressing much slower than 4G. And you see at the chart on the right, if you extrapolate this forward into time, in the future, that actually 5G is going to grow at a slower pace than 4G did. So we looked at those numbers and we want to go a bit deeper to try and understand why that's the case. So first of all, we look at 5G, where 5G is doing around the world. So it's a very disparate world in terms of adoption of 5G. We have some really good adoption of 5G in Asia, in China, in Korea, in Taiwan, and also in the US, and some parts of Europe, which is great. But other parts of the world have yet, as we've heard this morning, have yet to launch 5G or have very low penetration of 5G. But overall, at the end of last year, we had about 10% penetration. So 1 every 10 active SIM, cellular SIM, is on the 5G network. So looking deeper into the operators, so looking at the progression of 5G adoption for each operator, leaders of 5G. So those are the 30 largest 5G operators in the world in terms of 5G subscriptions. And what I'm showing here is on one end, the growth of 5G on a quarter-per-quarter basis on the left. So this is for the second quarter 2023, so it's very recent data. And at the bottom, we're looking at market maturity. So what's the portion of all SIMs on those operators' network that have 5G? Includes IoT. So you may see some operators like China Mobile featuring relatively low in terms of penetration, but that's because they have a lot of IoT, cellular IoT subscriptions. But what does this show? What's very interesting here is that the growth suddenly stops after 20% penetration of 5G. So there seems to be like a very quick way to get 5G adopted. We've got the early adopter phase, we've got a bit further than that, and that provides some monetization opportunities early on in the first couple of years, maybe first 3 years of 5G. But afterwards this dies down because the consumer market mostly is struggling to transition to 5G. So the first thing we looked at here is the devices market, and I was, as it was alluded in the previous presentation from Syed Ahmad, you know, the 5G devices market is very important to bring those devices, you know, make them affordable. So what we've noticed, so I used some of the devices data from our team and look at the entire smartphone install base in the world in 2022. And we noticed that about a third, a little less than a third of this install base corresponds to 5G capable smartphones. But then when we look a little bit deeper, we see that only about 45% of those 5G capable smartphones are connecting to a 5G network or are activated on a 5G network. So there's a huge missed opportunity there, and I think, you know, the first reason for it could be that, you know, in countries like Turkey, like here for example, you would have maybe quite a lot of 5G smartphones that are around, probably over 1 million, maybe 2 million, but there is no 5G network unless you go to the airport in Istanbul, which is beautiful, by the way. So yeah, this is a bit of an issue. The other issue is that so we are more dissociated in terms of how devices are being sold and how tariff and services are being sold compared to when 4G was launched. So there's less bundling of devices with contracts, so it's more dissociations, which means that yes, a lot of people may get 5G devices, but then they may not buy a 5G tariff at the same time. Also, the channel is different, so operators may not have the opportunity to promote 5G services when that consumer buys a 5G device online, for example. So far we've looked just at subscriptions. Let's look at revenues and ARPU and the monetization of 5G. So I've picked again, not the top 30, but here about over 200 5G operators that we're tracking, or we were tracking in 2022. We're tracking, there are more than those today. And we look at how fast or how much the ARPU has grown, the blended ARPU has grown in the past 12 months at the end of 2022. And you can see we compare the maturity of those operators in terms of their 5G adoption versus the ARPU growth, and we don't see a straight correlation. And that's a very important problem. But at the same time, you know, if you look at services revenues for a lot of operators that are 5G leaders and see strong services revenue growth. So there's something that's happening, but it may not be related directly to 5G. I think the very strong, difficult challenge that we have is that we've come out of COVID and we've entered we've had in the past 12 months very strong economic challenges with high inflation rates, for example, affecting the ARPU trend. So there are other macro elements that impact the ARPU trend, which clouds or obstruct what we could see as in terms of 5G impact on revenues and ARPUs. But there are some success stories out there. So the key question is, what can we do? So one of the things that we've seen, we tracked the tariff of operators, the pricing, how operators are pricing 5G around the world. And you can see a chart on the right. I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but we're categorizing the tariffs in different types of tariffs for 5G, you know, whether it's based on a data bundle, whether it's based on a speed tiering model, which is becoming more and more popular, or whether we have some sort of other types of differentiation, which includes rich content bundles, for example, like video, music, VR, AR experiences. And what we've seen is that a lot of operators are being more and more innovative with 5G pricing to try and bring that monetization. And that includes some of the examples that we've heard this morning from China Mobile and other operators, where, you know, we have some very exciting use cases for consumers that may not be large-scale use cases, but very interesting to promote. So I wanted to take a couple of examples here, which I've taken out of a report we just recently produced called 5G Leaders. And the first one at the top is from Chonghua Telecom in Taiwan. And why did I pick those examples? It's primarily because they provided some KPIs in terms of how well they're doing. So you can see in the case of Shanghua Telecom, they said that the monthly fees were 43% higher for 5G customers versus 4G customers. So they must be doing something good. And it's a blend of different experiences that they've put out in the past 12 months. One of those is evolving around live events and the World Baseball Classic tournament in particular, which is very popular. And they made it part of it, provided some kind of specific camera angles and 360 views of the games under the Hami video service. So what happened there? So this is just like for an event, so it's not necessarily a long-term proposition, but it is a good way to promote their video service. So that's going to generate an uplift in terms of RPU through the sale of that video subscription service. And then also they have many other services that they offer under the 5G brand. The second example is Singtel. So Singtel in Singapore, has been doing quite a lot of innovative services in the past few years. So I've picked a couple of those. Again, they reported 11% growth, so double-digit growth in service revenues, which is pretty good for an operator in a very mature market, very high penetration rate, very high 5G adoption rate. And they also have launched 5G standalone early on as well, and they've pushed out some network slicing commercial use cases as well in Singapore. And yeah, I've picked one example from, they did a live performance for a local band in the metro, underground, in the actual train, which they streamed over 5G live, which is pretty unique case. I think there was a mention of that with China Mobile this morning doing that as well in China. Sort of 5G private networks for underground transportation. But yes, this is not a mass scale, large adoption. It's not the killer app for 5G, but it definitely helps to get the interests of consumers and for consumers to want to sign up to 5G and then generate some indirect revenues through that. So moving on to the 2B side of the market, so the enterprise side of the market. So I've included a couple of charts there. From the one on the left is from a survey we conducted, I think in September of last year, and asking enterprises what did they want to do with 5G, and you can see fixed wireless access is one of the kind of #1 use case, but also mobile edge computing is also another important use case. And on the right, so we look at private network deployments. We have a tracker, and you can see a number of 5G private network deployments, still inferior to 4G at the moment, so 4G still dominates pretty much. And I think when we talk, there are some very interesting, I'll come to some examples, but I remember talking to a mining company in Brazil about remote controlled, those big mining truck lorries, those massive lorries you have on the mining site, and they have remote control capabilities to remote control those trucks. And they're using 4G for that, they're not using 5G yet. So there's some of those use cases. What's interesting to look at is, what is it that 5G really brings that 4G can't deliver? So a couple of use cases I've picked there. I think, why did I pick those ones? Because they came up from this report again, but I think they were interesting because maybe they're not in Asia. I know there are a lot of examples of use cases for private networks in Asia, specifically in China, so this is a little bit different for you maybe. So the first one is Mercedes-Benz, and again they have some KPIs there. So the KPIs that they cited here is that this factory, which manufactures automobiles, so in this case I think it's the S-Class Mercedes-Benz, and they're 25% more efficient as a result of the new technology that they use in this facility, including 5G. And you can see there's a series of applications for 5G in there, which goes from the use of data, driverless transport, and all sorts of applications that they use in the factory. The second one is a company in France. So I'm French originally, so maybe that's why I picked this example. I'm not biased at all. But so it's ArcelorMittal, which is a steel making company in France. And this, they worked with Orange to launch the largest private network, 5G private network in France. And that's, the size of it is pretty tremendous. So that's about 100 square kilometers. So it's like the size of a big city, more than a big city, like a region. You know, if you're in Europe, a region would be almost that size. So yeah, so those are very interesting examples. In both cases, you know, there is a lot of money put forward, invested. So it's a concrete example of deployments that generate value. You know, creating value is one of the important things that we look at for 5G. So going in the future, I'm not very optimistic, to be honest, with the roadmap for 5G. I think it's great. There's a lot of interesting applications. The technology is really amazing. The use of artificial intelligence, for example, in the networks will have many benefits in the future. But as we heard from some operators this morning, you know, in some markets are maybe not as advanced. A lot of those applications don't really resonate with a lot of revenue opportunities at a large scale. So I think a lot of operators, you know, at the moment are trying to look at how they can maximize the return on the investment with the current 5G networks that they have. We are entering a second phase of deployment for 5G. That's based around 5G standalone, and that's going to be the basis for 5G for the next phase of 5G, so 5G advanced. But I think, you know, it's going to take longer. We will get there, but it's going to take a bit longer than maybe what's written on the kind of theoretical, you know, technology papers and the roadmap set out by the 3GPP and the industry. But yes, I think, you know, things are progressing, and 5G, you know, if you think about those 50+% of smartphones out there that are 5G capable and not yet connected to 5G, this is a massive opportunity. So in conclusion here, so 5G is missing expectations. I think we can all agree on that. Like I said, you know, 45% of 5G smartphones are not activated on 5G networks at the moment. So if we had a virtual switch you could turn on, you could double the number of 5G users easily, you know, tomorrow. But it's not as easy as a virtual switch, sadly. And 5G monetization, you know, happens locally. Private network deployments, live events, you know, sports. But it does happen, which is locally and more indirect than we think. And then the technology roadmap for 5G will be long, and it will take time before we see very big opportunities in edge. And I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.